Perfect.
Great. Hi, I'm Tim Plunkett, and I work at Acquia, and I work for the office of the CTO, which is Dries, the creator of Drupal, is the CTO, and I live in Philadelphia, and I'm here to talk. Yeah. Okay, let's kill the wolf whistles. I'm here to talk about layouts. So, who here has built a Drupal site that you needed to do something with layouts? Okay, that was pretty much everybody. How many people have used panels? Okay. How many people have used context module? How many people prefer context module over everything else ever? Wow. Okay, one person for the record. Okay. So, as everyone knows, there's block module. Has been in Drupal since Drupal 1. It was in there before Drupal 1. December 2000 was when block module was first written. You can place, as in Drupal 7, you could place each block into one region per theme. Each block could have a set of conditions to say I want to show only to users of this role, or users or on article nodes. But that provided very little flexibility. And there was a single UI for every block on the entire site. So then, in July 2006, the panels module was first released. But panels isn't what you really think it is. When you think of the panels module, you use it for landing pages. You can create and override a system page. You can do all those things. That's actually Page Manager. Panels is just the underlying API that lets you do things with layouts and whatnot. So if you're used to using panels, you're really actually secretly using Page Manager. And everything you do only works within the content region of your page. So the header, your sidebar, your footer, all that stuff is outside of what panels can control, Page Manager. And this is now, as of today, the 30th most installed module in all of Drupal. The context module came about 2 years later. It's still popular. It's the 35th most installed, which shocked me when I was putting together the slide deck. I would have thought no one used it anymore. You can, instead of placing individual blocks and then defining conditions for each block, you define sets of conditions. And then things happen for that condition, one of which is placing blocks. It's actually really easy to set up, and it really makes sense. If you're given a spec for your site and said these things should happen for these sets of users on these types of pages, it makes really a lot of sense to just kind of lay everything out. But good luck coming back to a site 6 months, a year later, or worse, one you didn't build, and figuring out how that one block got in that one page. You'd have to dig through every condition group possible to find that one block. But it's a completely legitimate way to build a website. Then 2009 came Display Suite. So in Drupal 6 you had the field, CCK. In Drupal 7 you have the Field UI. And Display Suite was kind of like just enhancements to the Field UI. So it let you do some more things with a more complex maneuvering of your fields. It also let you group them and put them in different regions, within still the same little content main portion. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't use panels in conjunction with them. I've many times used both. But it's still just controlling just the little middle part, as opposed to block module, which is everything, and context module. And then finally, 2011, so the last one, is Panelizer. Now, for most of the sites I've built, I don't really build them anymore, but people I know, everyone uses Panelizer. So I was also surprised to see it's the 187th most installed module, way less popular than context or panels itself. But basically, it's panels integration for your fields, for the content type. So you could say, all articles have 2 columns, all events have 3 columns, this happens on this one. And you can do individually per node. So, my About page, node 5 can have this layout, but all the other nodes will have something else. And once again, it operates within just the content region. And finally, everyone's like, well, we have panels, we have Page Manager, we have Panelizer. But what about all those things we were still using block module for? The header, the footer. Panels everywhere. Has anyone successfully used panels everywhere on a production site? He's the only one in the world I've ever seen use it. I've tried. We try. I've seen people try, but it never actually works unless you are the creator of Panoply, which I'm not even going to get into in this presentation. It completely replaces the block module. You don't use the block module at all. You use panels to control every single part of your site. The nice thing is that you can delegate. Panelizer can just be for your content editors to lay out, like, oh, I want the image over here and the article over here. Whereas panels, you can then say, oh, next to the main content, I want a little list of related articles. Well, then leaving panels everywhere to control your static, more site-wide, like the Chrome of the site, and have each of those separate so that you don't have to have one single UI where you're managing every level of the entire page. Which means then you can assign permissions to different people, say they can only operate on this level, or they can do these other things. So that's sort of just an overview history. Hopefully most of you knew some of those things. That's for Drupal 7. Any questions so far? Great. So then the Drupal 8 development cycle started March 2011, officially at DrupalCon Chicago. And 1 month later, in April 2011, there was the Web Services and Core Context Initiative, commonly referred to as WSCI. It was intended to provide layouts for core. It also wanted to do a bunch of other things. And that is not a complete list. I just decided not to put them all on the slide because it wanted to do about 7 different things. It took them 1 year and 11 months to realize that that was too many things to do. So they split the entire initiative into 2. The routing and all the other fancy Symfony stuff was all going to continue on as WSCI, but there was a new blocks and layouts everywhere initiative that was going to focus on the plugins and layouts and stuff, and they called it Scotch, which is an equally stupid name. And then someone like 3 months later tried to come up with a backronym, and it really didn't work out. No one knows why it's called Scotch. It's still called Scotch. There's a Drupal Scotch channel on IRC. There's Scotch tags in the issue queues. You can still see people talking about it. It's gone. It's dead. And here's why. Blocks and layouts sort of ended up just being block and just blocks. They added the plugin system to core in July. Then they added the layout module in November of the same year. And then they decided that core was going to go through the feature completion phase. So anything that had been added to core, we're going to finish doing. And then we decided to rewrite the block module after we were in the completion stage. And then they said, okay, feature completion wasn't enough. Now we're going to go to API completion. And that was in July 2013. And then they removed the layout module because they decided it wasn't complete enough. And there are a couple reasons for that. Mostly, it never integrated with blocks. It let you put layouts on your page, and then that was it. You would have empty layouts with no content, which is kind of defeats the purpose. It had been attempted to build everything from a new model of thinking. It didn't really follow panels. It didn't follow display suite. It didn't follow anything. And the idea, the good thing was that it solved problems that we had in Drupal that still haven't been solved. But all the work is gone now and completely obsolete, which is a problem. So Drupal 8.0 was released a year and 4 months ago, November. And since then, when it was released, nothing really was in core to deal with layouts. We still have the new block module. The difference, which I'll get to in a minute, is about that you can block modules a tiny bit more flexible. Since release, we've worked on a couple things. First is the layout API. July 2014, so about almost 2.5 years ago, a couple of the people from the panels group worked on something called Layout Plugin, and it's a contributed module that all it does is just provide a common way to define layouts. Because if you've ever used Display Suite and panels, you'll know that the layouts you work on for one cannot be used in the other. So if you write this really great 3-column layout that has perfect CSS and does exactly what you want for Display Suite, and then you go want to use it for Panelizer, you can't. You have to redefine it and copy everything over and do things slightly differently in a very confusing distinction. So the idea was to just have a brand new single API for layouts. No UI, just the API. And as of now, it's used by Panelizer and Page Manager and Display Suite. They all now share the same layouting engine. So even with the contrib modules that there are now, if you write one layout, you can use it for every system there is. And as of a couple months ago, it was committed to core. So you no longer have to download an extra module. It's just in core as the layout API. Block module. Block module is still block module. The only difference is now you can place a single block infinite number of times. You can say I want it in the region, or the sidebar region on this page, in the footer on this other page, and on Tuesdays it should be in the header. But overall, still not that much flexibility compared to something like panels. And worse, you have one UI still. For every single possible permutation of your entire site, it's displayed in one long list, which is very hard to manage.
But there's buildable blocks too.
Not talking about that. That's content. We don't talk about content here. So the regions are still defined by your theme. In your theme.info file, you have to list each region, and it can only be controlled. It's for the entire site. You have the same exact regions. So if you want to have a page that has 3 columns, and on another page you want to have 2 columns, you have to have maybe 4 columns, and you hide them on certain pages. So you don't use that one on those cases. You add a single region for a single use case for Node 5. And that's the same as it ever was, and it's not very, very nice. Panels, status of panels, I have some good news. So the panels ecosystem as a whole, they were built over time. Like panels itself started with 4.7, and Panelizer didn't even start till Drupal 7. They're now being worked on in conjunction, all of them at the same time. And as of 6 hours ago, Panelizer had beta 1. So now you can, yay! I didn't do the work, so I can clap for it. I'm not bragging. It was a straight port, though. So you still are saying, oh, I would need to have panels everywhere, and panels, and page manager, and Panelizer in order to get that single cohesive approach to site building. And they're all still, they're working together, but they're not quite in sync with each other. So it's what you expect. If you're used to Drupal 7, it'll be very familiar. Overly too familiar in Drupal 8, it will look exactly the same way in all the problematic ways and the good ways. Same with context. It's exactly the same as it was. It doesn't do anything with layouts per se. It uses block module itself, and therefore the regions that are defined by the theme. So you can only have one layout for your entire site, and it works the same way it did in Drupal 6. Display Suite, stable release, got an 8.3.0. And you can use it right now. It's because it's only just an enhancement of the field UI, and the field UI mostly didn't change. It does exactly what you would expect. And it does use the layout API, though. So if you are to define custom layouts for Display Suite, they will can be used in other areas later once the other modules mature. Finally, we get to the thing that I worked on. It's called Field Layout. We talked about the name for a little bit. I don't know how I feel about it yet. It's basically just a slimmed down version of Display Suite. So all it does is add layout API support to the field UI in core. And it was committed. It will be, as of right now, it will still be an 8.3.0, which comes out in April. There are plans. It's an experimental module, and so the API or the functionality set can continue to increase. So we are trying to get all of Display Suite's main functionality in, and then start working on what Panelizer does. But the goal is to kind of do it in a consistent core way. Okay, any questions so far?
I thought you said that Layout API had been created in the contrib space. I didn't catch when you said it moved into core.
Yes.
I guess it has.
So 2014, it was called Layout Plugin. It was in core. It got committed this past fall after 8.2 was released. So it's not in a release yet, but it'll be in April. It's in the dev branch right now as Layout API. And it's not a module. It's just on by default because it has no UI. Other question? So, yes.
So you're saying incorporate Panelizer functionality. Is that the per node or per content type functionality?
So we're going to get to the what's next in a second. And other questions on what we just talked about. There was another hand. Okay, so what's next? This is the fun part. And this is the interesting part because we don't have a plan. In a good way. So there is now an official, so if anyone paid attention to the Drupal 8 cycle, there are these things called initiatives. So there was the Configuration Management Initiative, the Multilingual Initiative. There were about 6 others, including the Views in Drupal Core Initiative. There are new initiatives now. So one of the new initiatives is the Layout Initiative. And there is a team behind the Layout Initiative. And it is looking for members because I'm the only one. So I'm now in charge of the Layout Initiative.
Is it actually a module too? Is it just you say it's on by default.
It is an API that has no UI, but there will be, so field layout, the one I was just talking about, this is a module.
Okay.
So you would, because it's experimental, eventually, once this is stable, it would be part of field UI. So it'll be on by default, but it's still, you can turn it off. Yes. So as far as what's next, we got, oh yeah, Mom.
When you said Panelizer functionality,
Yes.
does that mean that Panelizer is also in Drupal 8 and you can use it currently?
Panelizer is a beta 1 as of today in contrib.
Okay.
So it works. And as of beta 1, I think they're planning on supporting an update path from now. So before there were all sorts of changes and they were like, whatever you're doing, it could just get broken tomorrow. As of now, they're planning on supporting an update path to stable. And here's the thing, all this stuff, it's in conjunction with the work being done by the contrib maintainers, because we're all in the same chats, and we all talk and share ideas, and it's all the modules that I'm basing the ideas on, because it's the stuff everyone's been using for 4 years, or a lot longer now. But those modules will probably continue to exist for a good long time, at least until they become either completely obsoleted or just unmaintained because everything else is so decent enough. And then, for example, Display Suite actually ships with a small module called DS Extras. And a lot of the really cool things you think about with Display Suite are actually in that Extras module. And that's not even anywhere near in scope for what we plan to do. But so that could live on as a new module. Yeah, so.
Did I miss that part? The layout plugin and layout API, the relation between them?
Yes.
Can you repeat the
So
Sorry.
the question was about the difference between layout plugin and layout API. And sorry, yeah, remind me to repeat the questions for the recording. Yeah, so layout plugin was written in 2014, and then as of in the fall, it was put into core.
Okay, so that makes sense.
I'm going to take a quick sip of water, excuse me. So what's next? This is where the audience participation increases. So basically, I'm going to, whatever everything you say, I'm going to think about and then maybe put in the core someday. Like, that's the idea here. So one idea that's already been proposed is theme layout, or naming to be decided upon later. Basically replacing defining your regions in your theme info file with the layout API. And I tried to do that, and it took me 3 hours to do, and then I realized, well, this is really pointless because you can only have one layout per your entire theme. And if you can't switch it, then what's the point? So then we were saying, oh, well, we can put the conditions, just like you have on blocks, where, oh, this user gets to see this layout. And I was like, well, where do we put that? Like, a theme isn't a thing. It's just the template files and the CSS. And it wasn't really clear how far to go with that. And if we do that, that's sort of going towards panels everywhere. But panels everywhere, no one really uses that, obviously, because it's impossible to use. And just because we make it easier to use doesn't mean it's useful. So there are a lot of things here that we can do, but we don't know if we should do. So the next one that was proposed was a landing page builder, basically replacing Page Manager. So right now, as it says, already possible with Panelizer, you could create a content type called landing page, and then make one for each of your landing pages, and with per node or per entity overrides, you could say, no, this node has this layout, and this node has this layout. So it's not clear if we want to build a completely new UI for just finding landing pages, or just make your landing page content type the way to do it. So there's some give and take there.
Or are we allowed to?
Yeah, please raise your hand if you have.
Why don't you have?
interjections.
You could make like a field that you could optionally include all the entity types, content entity types, where you could pick a layout.
So the question was, what if you have a field that's on entity types and bundles that could then define the layout? And that is how Panelizer works. And I had a slide about this. What if we had fields that can contain blocks? And this is a little, not quite what you asked, but similar. Do we want to have, well, actually I'll come back to that. I won't get ahead of myself here. So that's a possibility. So that's how Panelizer is architected. You have a field that on each bundle that then contains the layout settings. And that's how they do per entity overrides. So you can say, oh, this one has this layout, this one has this layout. So that's an option. That goes back to I remember, in Drupal 7, it was hard to create new entity types. So everyone just reused Node to do everything. And you abused your content. So your content types list was like normal things like event and article. And then it was very obscure things like item or order. That's like order. An order is not content. I don't want to. I want to go create an order node. No, like I want to order something, and just because you store it as that doesn't make any sense there. So now with Drupal 8 and with, for example, with order, you have the commerce module provides. It's much easier to provide new entity types, so you can get away from reusing nodes a lot easier in Drupal 8. So do we really want to go down the path of saying reusing nodes for your landing pages is the way to go, or do we want to make a separate UI? So, as I said with the theme issue, where you can only have one layout per theme, we could go with a variant system. So if you've used panels or Panelizer, you can create individual variants. And it's similar to the context module, where you define a set of conditions. You say, okay, for this user role, for this content type, for this whatever, use these different blocks, layouts, everything. What if we just added that to all of Drupal? So your theme could have different variants, your page could have different variants, your content types could have different variants, even your fields could have different variants. And if we do that, it would be very powerful. And it would probably solve all the use cases of all the contrib modules. But I can't even envision a way to present that to a user, even one who knows what they're doing, so that given what you're looking at, what am I really changing here? Am I changing this one node? Am I changing all event types? Am I changing all the sidebars for every site, etc.?
You come in at saying like the variants were kind of like context, but the thing that makes context confusing when you come back to a site like you said is that contexts are additive. You can have n contexts basically become active on a given page because each one is like, is the user an admin? Add this block. Is this a story node? Add this block. Is there the variants here? Are we talking about additive things like context?
Yes.
Or?
So the question was about context. And if you use panels and C tools in Drupal 7, it's basically the context API is in Drupal 8 core. So what if I'm on a node page, you then know what kind of node page am I on? What kind of author do I have? What fields are on this thing? Is this page, has it been tagged with a taxonomy term in this one vocabulary? And you don't get to say, oh, I only want these things. You get everything that could ever be applied to that page as a whole stack. And what was your point about that, though?
That panels variant system is different. Panels variant system, each variant they're ordered, and each one gets evaluated in order, and the first one that doesn't say ignore me gets used.
Correct.
And none of the other ones ever get consulted.
Right. So that is
called
a chain of responsibility approach.
Right.
So if you have 6 things in a row, the first one to say, yeah, I'm it, gets to go, and no one else after it. That's how in Drupal, that pattern is in Drupal 8 a lot more. Mm-hmm. For example, that's how the breadcrumb system works now. Mm-hmm. So that would be the variant system we would use, because that's already in Page Manager. It's already basically a block visibility group. But it's baked into core in a sense, with the way conditions and context work together.
Would that replace the current block approach?
That's the question. Should we replace the block module?
So we would lose the current additive block matching approach. So that's the catch with page. That's one of the catches with panels everywhere.
Yes.
Is that you're like, cool, now I want to add this block in the left sidebar below the menu. Well, we have 85 variants for our page manager. Go add it to every single one.
Yes, and this is where I went back to the original layout initiative back in 2013 or so, or 2012. They had solved problems that we haven't solved yet, and that is the problem. They had worked on a concept of the difference between a master display and the actual live display. And so I wish I had a diagram for it. I could probably go find one, but basically part of if you picture all of your regions, part of them would be grayed out, and basically those are going to be inheriting whatever the default set is, and then you can say, oh, in between that, I want to put this one thing, and it really comes down to how the views UI works. If you've ever used multiple views displays, you can say, oh, I want to inherit all the same sorts and all the same contextual filters, but I want these different fields, and you say override. And then if you have overridden every display and you want to add a new field to every view, you have to go through and do it for the default and then every one that's overridden. And I don't think there is a solution to that, except for in introducing a kind of default and inherit sense. And you could say, the sidebar inherits, but I'm only overriding the left sidebar inherits, and I'm only overriding the right sidebar in this context, for this variant. And even once we get the actual functionality nailed down, as I said, presenting this in a UI is going to be very interesting. So there's another hand over here. Or was that? Yeah.
Can you explain the idea of a theme only being able to have one layout, you were saying?
Right. So right now, The question was, thank you, how can you talk about more about how a theme can only have one layout? If you've ever written a theme, you have to define your regions in the theme info file. And there is a single function in core that goes and gets that. And the block module uses it, the context module uses it, the theme API uses it, everything uses it. And it assumes that they will always return the same thing for that theme. So if you ask Bardic what its regions are today, it'll be the same answer infinitely until you clear your cache because you changed your file. So creating a mechanism to trick that into saying, oh, I want my theme to have this other layout, we can do that. But then we run the risk of implementing that and then having the field layout and the theme layout thing being disconnected and not being able to control anything in the middle or if we build just panels everywhere and just Panelizer and they're different UIs and have different functionality, it can be very confusing. Which is why I wrote this slide, which just says what I just said. Wish I'd hit advance. Let's skip the next slide. So then this slide is confusing because I say the word field and block about 17 times. So we right now, as Jody actually mentioned earlier, we have fieldable blocks in core. It's called block content. And it's basically, if you've ever used Bean module or fieldable panels panes, or fieldable panels pane module. It's that. It's in Drupal 8. It's stable. It's been there since 8.0. That exists. There's also, everyone I know who's ever tried to do a thing said, oh, yeah, so I'm editing my page template, and I really want to get that one image field from the node, but show it over in the sidebar. How do I do that? Like, I can't figure out how to do that. And the answer is you can't. Only the node template knows about that image field. So the two solutions the easy solutions are install panels, which isn't an easy solution for anything. And then the other one is there's a module called field block. And all it does is expose all your fields as blocks. But then once again, you're building from a single block UI every page on your site. So if just that one page, that client really, really wants that one image over in the sidebar, you're going to have to do that in the entire block UI. But if they want it on 6 different pages or 60 different pages, you're going to have an unmanageable list. And here's the other idea. So has anyone ever used the EVA module, the Entity Views Attachment? About a third or less of people. So that allows you to, in your manage display of your content type, in between all the body and the title, you can say, I want to show this view here. It's pretty cool. Works really well, except for when it doesn't. You can also, of course, ever since the beginning of views, make a block display and then use the block UI to place it. So if someone says to you, okay, I really want a list of other articles by the author of the node you're looking at, and I want it below or in between the comment form and the rest of the article. Well, the comment form is controlled by the content type, and the rest of the article is controlled by the content type. So then you go to the views UI, you create an EVA view, you then go to the manage display, and you place it right between the two, and then you're done. And you're great. You add the features, you push it to Git, blah, blah, blah. And then they say, actually, we really want it on the right sidebar. But the right sidebar is controlled by the block module, or panels everywhere. So then you have to go back to the views UI and get rid of the EVA view, and then make a block display view, and then go place it. And then it's a block, which you can't really put into features really easily in Drupal 7. So you don't even know how to deploy it. And you just give up, and then you quit your job, and you go become a farmer. That's awful. It's really awful. Why is it that just because I want to place content in this part, and I want to place it in this part, I need completely different modules with completely different architectures? So this is my question as to how to solve that. Either do we say every field is actually secretly a block, and just by default, all those blocks are added to your entity display? Or do we say all blocks are actually fields and make the whole page fieldable?
That second one sounds super crazy.
They both sound terrible. Well, you said the second one's better. You said it was worse.
Yeah.
They're both terrible. But are they? I don't know. So I need more feedback.
I tend to use tokens a lot whenever I want to put very specific content somewhere.
I almost forgot about token module.
So solving the image problem, if we wanted to put an image in the right-hand block, put the token in a block and then place it in there. But then the problem is, what if they want it in between
Right.
the content and the comments? Then
So token, it does exactly what you want until it doesn't. And it doesn't actually solve the problem.
You still
you
need a block on the
get-
sidebar.
Yeah, you still have to use two different types of systems to do basically the same thing. And that's the thing, we don't know what we're talking about here. Imagine if you didn't know what views was, what content types were, and what the block module was, and someone said, "Oh, just drag it from there to there," and you can't because you have to completely re-architect everything. It doesn't make any sense. Question in the back, or suggestion, or comment.
I don't know if this makes any sense, but the first option sounded a little more clear
Sure.
in my brain because, like, a field is a lot of things, like data storage and all this technical stuff. So maybe when you print it onto a page, maybe that is kind of a block. If everything's a block, then it's like a rendered field is a block. I don't know if that
Yes.
makes
So
sense, like I said. So it's like,
that was a
like,
vote
as
confidence
a
of the
square, a block
right. And block
concept
is,
makes sense.
and it comes back to. Yeah, sorry to cut you off. Yeah, so it comes back to block just really being a name for a thing that can be placed.
Yeah.
And in panels they're called panes. In blocks they're called blocks. But yeah, if we rethink of the entire thing as like a placeable thing, which someone will come up with a name for someday.
Tile.
A tile, jeez. A tile. Tile. Actually, that's not the word.
It's a
Nodes.
square.
Modules, that's what WordPress calls them.
Thing.
A thingy. We already have thingies. We already did thingies. They became config entities. That's a whole nother session. Yeah, so that's some food for thought. Okay, so that
Isn't 8 halfway there with turning a whole bunch more stuff into blocks?
yes. So as 8 turned a lot of things into blocks. So for example, in Drupal 7, you had this magical theme settings page where you had to click checkboxes to say, I want my site slogan here, or turn it on. I want the slogan to also have an image next to it and my name. The local actions, the breadcrumbs, they were all hard-coded by the page template. They're all blocks now. That was one big win that really no one really cares about because you generally leave them in the same place, but that one day you want to move them, you're going to be very grateful. Yeah, we could. The other thing that we have introduced, which is not used anywhere in Drupal core, is the context-aware blocks. And so context meaning it knows things about the page, as it was presented to that one user. So the request, user 2 requested the node 1 page on a Tuesday in this time zone, and they were, everything you can know about the user, the language they're looking at, everything on the page can be gathered and passed to different blocks. So if we went with the field, made all fields secretly made them into blocks, the UI could stay the same, but then you could from the field UI start pulling in other things, like a menu or like a menu block. Menu block is basically in core as well. I know
Well, the
menu.
node title is a block now. Node title is a block now.
It can be. Yeah.
And you can shut it off, which is a
Yeah.
beautiful thing.
Sure is. Everything. The only 2 blocks you can't turn off are the main content block, which is basically means print the page. And if you tell it not to print the page, it'll print it anyway. There's actually code that says, oh, if you tried to not do that, do it anyway. The other one is the help block, which is where it prints out the messages. You can't turn off the help block. You can move it, but you can't actually turn it off. If you do, it'll still print it because it still needs to tell you things. But yeah, everything else can be turned off now. So if we go more in that direction, you have more flexibility. I think the resistance there is it's an order of operations thing. If we make everything a block, we really need to fix the block UI because the block UI is terrible. And if we start allowing blocks all over the place, then it goes back to the problem of debuggability. It's like, well, what was responsible for this? And I think some of that could be solved just by more debugging information. Like already right now with Twig, you could turn on the debug flag and it'll print out a massive amount of information telling you which file physically on disk, which file was loaded, which other files, names could be added instead, all of that. Kind of like the Devel themer module, if you've ever used it. It's baked into core. And with the contextual links, you could click on it and say, well, like, how do I get to this thing? Like, how do I manipulate this one placement? But that once again comes back to the problem of if you want to change something that's overridden in an easy way without going to 800 places, that's still a problem. The other one is that Since some things can only show up, this is currently still a problem with the block module, and it has been since it was introduced. If you want to, while looking at your page, say I want to move that block down, it only shows you the blocks that you can see. So, if you're not on the right page, it could, you'll have other blocks there that aren't shown to you. So you can't really order them amongst themselves if you don't have all of them available. And this goes right into the inline preview stuff that is being worked on in Drupal 8. There's an experimental module called Settings Tray that is aimed at making it easier to edit your site from the front end. But if we make Drupal more powerful, it makes it harder to represent. So there is an issue tag in the issue queue, and I'm going to post these slides up. That's a link you can click on, and it's called blocks layouts with a hyphen, and that's tagged all the things that we're actively working on. There's a plan issue, that's the NID, and it's a link. That's sort of the overarching plan. And the plan says, do the things that we already did and then figure out the rest of the plan. So it's my job to figure out the rest of the plan, which is what you're all helping me with right now, is doing my job for me. There's a IRC channel called Drupal Layouts, and there is a Slack Layouts channel. And I'm in both, and it's just really a place to bounce ideas off and get feedback. So the thing is here, most of the people we need right now are site builders. A lot of people have a hard time contributing to core because they say, I'm not a developer, or I don't have the time to deal with the core issue queues. You don't, because there are no issues yet, because we don't know what we're doing. So anyone that's a site builder with experience, and many of you, all of you seem to be and have helped already, can have opinions and help shape, knowing what the 18 ways of doing things are in the real world. How do we come up with one that does most of what we want in a way that is not worse? And that's all I could ever hope for. So thank you very much. Are there more questions or more ideas? We have maybe 15 more minutes.
I'm seeing we're all approaching this from a very technical standpoint.
Absolutely.
How do we get Drupal to solve this problem of composing a page? And I'm wondering if we look outside of the technical side of things and look at design and talk to designers, and I'm thinking, and this is I'm entering an area that I don't know that much about, but Pattern Lab, Atomic Design, breaking things down so they're reusable, the namespacings they do and the inheritance.
Thanks, Peter.
It's not on.
It? Yeah.
Well, I'm just.
He said Pattern Lab, and now he's going to continue talking.
Okay, looking at Pattern Lab and looking at their name. First of all, Pattern Lab's got good naming conventions because none of them conflict with Drupal exactly, and it starts to get you thinking, okay, you break things down into small components, you inherit them into your widgets, and then your pages. Even how when you go into the Pattern Lab UI and you look at your pages, kind of remarkable because it gives you this perfect overview. And a lot of site builders are using Pattern Lab and incorporating those templates into, they're awkwardly, I hate to say it, they're awkwardly bringing these templates into Drupal. And if Drupal started to match up with these systems, that might work as another way to approach this problem.
I agree. So that's the thing. I am a developer. There are I lied. There are secretly other people working on this. They just don't want to be responsible for it, so they didn't put their name down. But there are some front-end developers and other site builders with ideas about this. And that's the thing. I don't care what the storage mechanism is. I don't care how I want the API to be good for developers later, but it should absolutely not be informed by that. That's an implementation detail. And I've been more focused on the site builder flow, but that really is, in a way, the front-end developers flow, because they work together, or they're the same person in some situations. So the other thing I have been doing a lot of research on is other CMSs, or just not even CMSs, but ways to build websites. And it's not the thing where it's I want to get in on what Squarespace is doing and cut out them, and that's what Drupal should be focused on. No, but it's nice to use, and it's easy, and it makes sense. And sure, it's not as flexible in some ways, but that just because ours is more powerful doesn't mean it should be harder to use or impossible to use, which is, in my opinion, it is now. I don't know that. I think Pattern Lab is a good thing, and it's funny. I only laughed not at Pattern Lab, but because it's 13th time someone said it today. It's the new thing, and I know there's a lot of pain points there because it's so different, but it's not different in a bad way. So I think there's a lot to be done there, Howard.
I mean, I think, like, should I wait for a mic or no?
Yeah.
I think the thing I keep coming back to is what we sort of like brushed over was sort of like config entities versus content entities. I think like that comes back for me especially. Sorry, my point is actually like I agree about it not the technical implementation details not mattering, but like that is a division that in Drupal we've talked about a lot, and I think that's what makes thinking about this stuff hard, because I think the like outside in approach that we're getting with like settings tray and stuff of like, let me be on a page, click a button, and be able to add things, change things. I don't want to leave to go do that stuff. And that's sort of how Wix and Squarespace and all that stuff is like super like outside in. Let me pull up a tray of the things I can add and then just drag them and drop them where I want them to be. The tricky bit is that like in Drupal we tend to be working on these really big CMSs where we're building like a system.
Yes.
And you don't decide on a one-off basis. We have structured information. We're going to import a million things, and like we need to be able to lay out all million of that type of page in a way that like we can update them all at once. But then like on one-off pages we want to be able to customize it, and we kind of need those two things to play together well.
Yes.
And that was sort of, I think, the thing that makes this stuff so hard to think about. And I kind of wonder if we need to own that those are different.
Yep.
And communicate that clearly, but have like a unified UI. And so you can modify, like you can switch from modify we need to pick a term, and maybe there's something in Pattern Lab, I'm not sure. We need to like flip from the like template editing mode of like I'm editing this for all the things over to the item mode, and like maybe that just needs to be like a hard switch where like once you flip over into item mode you own it, and like if you break it you get to keep both pieces.
And so that's that last part about when you are overriding, or once you have overridden something, is it all your problem now, or can you delegate things back to the generic? That's what the previous layout initiative spent most of their time on, and they were really close. It's just that it was non-functional.
What did they decide? I mean, if they've already thought this through, did they come up with like really solid recommendations that we can now read and decide if they make sense, or was it like? So
the person who knows moved to the wilderness of Michigan and lives by himself now, or whatever, and like is unreachable and not really part of Drupal anymore. But he's a super approachable guy, and I could probably track him down and ask him. But it's like basically all of his
pick
work.
up a collection to hire you a Sherpa, or
yeah, the Finding Sam Boyer adventure. The work he did, it was funny. As I said, it was non-functional. It's because he purposely did that. I mean, it wasn't a mistake. He even went so far as when he was writing the code to name it badly. So, we were talking about thingy earlier, or tile, and it was basically like punt that to the end. So he called it was like the controller was called the drunk controller. And it was drunk controller, and the whole concept was just called princess. Because he didn't want it to be called layouts or like rendering. He just called it princess because it was just like, I think he was playing Mario.
Because your princess is in another castle, when you get to the end and you think you've won, the goalpost keeps moving.
It was a little Sisyphus-like. And he, that was the thing. Like he was doing all this high level forward thinking, but the problem is now going back and looking at it, it's all meaningless and useless in a way. Like it didn't all get documented, his thought process, and you can kind of discern where he was going. But it's like archaeology at this point.
And a bit of a fractal, like most of Sam's plans.
Yeah, I mean, the person we're talking about is a genius developer and awesome contributor to Drupal over the years, but like, doesn't help me right now. So, yeah.
So, I want to ask.
Wait for the mic, please.
Oh, sorry. Everyone here's used views, right? I mean, and it's that model, it's essentially that model that we're talking about, where you've got the master, you have that individual override, you plan for that, you accommodate that, you know that you're going to have to make that investment of revising 10 unique views that all overrode the master, right?
Yes, but we're talking about, so this comes back to the split between configuration and content. You have tens of configuration, or hundreds if you're going to have a bad time. You have thousands, millions of content. So if you override one display, and you probably shouldn't have, and you have to go back and update 10 of them, that's like an afternoon of work. If you have overridden the display of 1,000 or let's say 1,000 articles, because you're doing like New York Times like long form stories, and all of a sudden they really need this one ad sponsor block right in that one spot. Unless we devise some other mechanism, which we could do, there's no way to say, oh, I want to override that one part, please, for these things. So yeah,
entity and workflow.
So yeah, and then we come back. Yeah, I don't want to get into that.
No, I mean,
wait for the next session.
I mean, what about the thought of, not solving the per individual piece of content entity override within core, like maybe add variants per bundle, but not per piece of content.
So that is what I'm leaning towards, or what I was leaning towards, because it's easy and it's well scoped and you can know when you're done. But I don't want to get to a point where it then becomes impossible to add that later and then have all this other work be for naught. Enemy is the perfect of the good and all that. Like, I want to get something shippable. But the other problem is that's the killer feature. That's the thing people need yesterday. The per entity stuff is what everyone actually wants. Not because they, as site builders, want it, it's because their clients need it. And maybe their clients don't need it, but when they're the one paying you, they get to say what they need. And when they want it, that one page, because it's their bio page, to look different, like, you got to do it somehow.
It feels also like it's where the industry has already gone.
Right. So, and I mean, yeah, I would love to just say, per content or per node overrides aren't important, but I'd be lying to everybody, and the stuff we put into core would be just as useless as everything else that's been done.
But you can do it now with page templates.
Yes.
Just that there's no UI for it.
You can.
And that's the beauty of, and what I love about using page templates is you can debug them because it's on disk.
Right. So page templates, none of this stuff replaces that, except for when it does. But no, I mean, it doesn't in a sense. So for example, your default node template, every time you go to the fields UI, you add a field, you don't have to go to the page template and add equivalent code for it. It'll print it out for you unless you tell it not to. And you always have that option. All of this stuff would all still result in templates at the end of the day, and the work that's been done still does. So right now, if you use the field layout module and you override the node article display, you still have node-article.html.twig as the template file, and you can say, what it was doing was pretty cool, except actually I want to do this other thing. So we don't lose that. I don't think any of this would ever replace that. Mostly because it wouldn't get committed as such, because there's such a drive towards Twig, especially with Pattern Lab, because Pattern Lab, you can use it with Twig already outside the scope of Drupal, that we don't want to disenfranchise Twig users or template friendly work. So I don't worry about that, I would say. And yeah, you can do whatever you want with that right now, but either if there's no UI for something, then it hurts the. We're not going after the complete neophyte, but someone who's used another system who's like, well, this just happened to me. Someone's like, well, yeah, no. So I finished. I did a custom theme. I did all my fields, and then I started entering content, and I just really wanted to rearrange things. Like, where's the UI for that? And I laughed because I was writing this session, and I was like, there isn't one. That's what my job is now. And it's like, there should be a UI for that if you don't want to write templates. Yeah.
Something that I missed from the context module when I was working on a site that used that used the context module exclusively for layout was this site kind of abused it and had over 100 different contexts. But then there was the UI module where you could actually go to the front end and click manage this page, I forget the link, but then you highlight your mouse over which one.
Oh, that's new to me. That's awesome.
You could actually see which of the 100 contexts was placing this block in that specific region.
Yeah.
And that's something I kind of miss. Like that would be pretty cool to incorporate that into panels too, because panels, it's like you just get one layout with all the blocks in this one thing, this one variant.
It should be possible though. So if you've used panels, hopefully you've used IPE, the in-place editor, and that didn't launch with Drupal 7 panels. That was a later addition. The panels panes know things about themselves, right? They can introspect, and they could, or even the thing printing it could tell it things. So you could add, that could be a feature request to panels right now. You could say, I want a UI like that in panels, and hover over the block, and it could tell you things. And we could absolutely add that, or it could be added in contrib. Not with block module itself, but with the new, maybe even in block module in Drupal 8, you could say what's placing this. Now the answer is always going to be block module. That's the thing. So, but yeah, you could do that in panels, I'm pretty sure. I mean, you could write that code to do that and have that be a feature. But that's a really good point, and that would really help with debuggability. I agree.
But
you pass the mic back.
Isn't the difference between context and panels is that, once you vary, then you're forked, right? So like all those variants are different.
Right. So that's
you could build a UI where you say, how is this page different from this page? This block is showing up. How's it different? Well, this page is triggering 5 contexts.
Yes.
And this is triggering only 4.
That's what Howard was speaking to earlier, with the one's additive and one is only one wins.
Right.
The Highlanders model, as we call it. There can be only one. So, yeah, that is a really interesting consideration. That if we want to try to replace the block module and obsolete the context module, we have to provide for something like that. But that's completely contrary to the entire model. So I don't.
Now, if we just add a concept of like
both
a rogue block, and the rogue block can be like, I'm adding myself to any page that matches these conditions, and I will be the 3rd item below the. I come after the content
patches
block, wherever the content block shows up.
Yeah, I mean, there's the possibilities are endless, but the real thing is we need to plan and we need to work on it. Yes.
There's also an element of by using multiple layout modules, given governance. So, like, if I build this part of the page with display suite, that means that my content editors can't really get into it, versus like using something like in-place editor, where then they have the freedom based on their permissions to move stuff around. So if everything is exposed at the same like macro or micro level, then there's either more roles and permissions required, or more trust and less lockdown of your editing experience.
So you said that to me last week, and I forgot to add a slide about it. But yes, that. So the ability to, and that's the thing in panels. Even you can, in theory, lock down specific block. But yeah, if we say all of these things all the way down are the same system, you have to sort of be able to provide like almost like a fence around it. And actually, I did sort of have a slide about that. I skipped. So has anyone used mini panels?
Yes, and I'm not a fan.
I thought that was going to be the opposite. You seem very excited. You were excited with anger.
They're awful. I have one customer now who we just recently launched their site, and mini panels is killing them.
Yes.
Because it loads on. Yeah.
So mini panels is bad because it operates sort of outside of what you expect. But what if everything was mini panels?
That's terrible.
Yeah. But what if everything was mini panels and it was good? So in the sense that so a mini panels, for anyone that hasn't used it, is really just like groups of blocks, and then they can infinitely nest, which can be fun or terrible, generally terrible. But the terribleness is because of what you choose to do with it, not inherently in itself. But yeah, so when we talked about before, you have panels everywhere is the whole page, and then you have panels page manager inside of it, and then you have Panelizer, and then you have display suite, and then you have field thing. What if instead of having 4 different systems, we have one, and we define sort of like the content, the fields are nested in the content, and the content is nested in the page, and the page is nested in the site. Whatever, and you could define more of them, and then you could finally have like a sidebar where you can then say, oh, this sidebar, instead of controlling it all from one thing, you could say, oh, I want to see just this sidebar. It would be like, for example, if you load the block UI, you see every region and then you see every block inside of it. What if you could just have a small UI that's like, what's the little table drag for just the sidebar, please? And we actually talked about this earlier for Drupal 8. So if you could kind of zoom in, and it reminds me like the Google Earth thing when they, on TV shows when they start at the Earth and they zoom in all the way to like a block. a city block. So you could do like a zip code, town, state, whatever. And each one would kind of be its own thing. And then you could have permissions per and say, oh, this little bit, this is the thing that the marketing department told us we had to have. But this is the thing, this is the part where the content editors can play, and that will just sit there and you can't really mess with it. And then if we still have the ability to say, oh, where is this in my site? Like, what is making this one thing show up? So that is a possibility. But then we also run into the possibility of making hell on earth for everyone. So.
Yeah, there's like crashed like a.
Yeah, well, it's also mini panels is very right. The way it's architected, because it's working against Drupal, is very heavy. And that's the thing. A lot of these things, Display Suite and all of them, they are kind of setting up. They're very protective of themselves. They set up like, well, this is what I do, and nothing else can get in my way, and I can only focus on this one part of the site. When we move things in the core, we can start assuming that things will use them more. For example, views in Drupal, everything else below 7 and below, was a module you had to download, and then it did some things. It's in core now. So then we replaced a lot of stuff with views. For example, the admin content listing, which is the listing of all nodes. That's a view. You can just go install Drupal and start customizing that view straight up. And because it's already a part of core, it can kind of be like a friendly neighbor and help out other parts of the system and be, unified in a way and integrated better. And if a lot of these are painful because you're kind of slapping another concept on top of Drupal. But if we build it as part of Drupal and then everything adopts it, ideally it would be less painful. In theory, maybe. The other good note is that in Drupal 8 you have a very, very robust caching layer. So the performance thing is pretty much not a problem anymore. So I'm now over time. So. This is the last session, so we could talk forever.
Well, there's a closing session. Is it? Yeah.
It's closed down.
There will be a few minor giveaways, a little rah-rah, and directions to the after party. So.
Well, that sounds important. Any other questions?
The important part is the location of the after party.
Yeah. Yes. Do we have the mic somewhere?
Yeah.
Oh, you have it.
I can speak up and I'll do it.
Well, I just want, if they're recording it,
Yeah.
so yeah.
It's almost like I want your opinion, but I also want to bring up the paragraphs module. I need to phrase this properly so we're all on the same page. I'm not sure how I feel about it, but what's interesting is it's really, people are using it to build pages to supplement panels, and designers are thinking in the paragraphs are so successful because that's what designers are designing now. These stacked blocks that build pages. And but figuring out how that's going to impact the ecosystem, because it's possible. It's not that paragraphs will replace what you're working on, but it might take over certain aspects of it, like
But my stuff's in core, so they can't really do anything.
But they have introduced some really the nested entity system grouping. It's
when it works, it's wonderful. That's all. I mean, so that paragraphs is very interesting, and it is new, and it's kind of eating Drupal right now. In a lot of different ways, but it's still, I don't feel like there's a best practice around that. And you can use it with Display Suite, you can use it with Panelizer. You don't have to, you might not want to.
I know you can use it in replacement for one of those, or like replacement.
Right, you can, yes, you can, but so my thought is that it is complementary, and everything we do is always trying to keep a weather eye on what contrib is focused on. And I mean, Panelizer, even though I just found out it's like not that popular, it's secretly that popular, as far as I know. Like that's what people are writing articles about. That's what people are building real sites with. The other thing is that the usage statistics are kind of fake anyway, because that's only for people that leave the update module turned on, and most professional people don't leave the update module turned on in production sites. So it's kind of reporting what people that don't know what they're doing are doing. So maybe we shouldn't really care. But it's still a cool metric. Anyway. Paragraphs is taken over, and I think that along with all of the other things, we should kind of keep an eye on that and enable them to do things. That's the thing, we're working a lot. Like all the field layout stuff is half the code is ripped from Display Suite, and the author of Display Suite is the one that helped push it in. So I haven't talked to the paragraphs people yet, but I know like you've been using it with Pattern Lab, right? And it's because it kind of lends itself to that. Outside of the traditional Drupal thinking, and like almost more like structured content in a way, and it's infinitely flexible.
I don't know, but they've improved. They're doing a lot of work on the UI, which
yes.
is very interesting. And that I think might come impact core, because they're trying to figure out a really difficult
Yes, their UI work is pretty interesting. Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of our biggest clients and biggest CMS, long-running CMS projects moving like everything into that.
Yeah, I mean the field collection module is officially planned to deprecate itself and say use paragraphs instead, please.
Oh.
Yes.
And then but now before they do that, someone's going to write an upgrade path or a migration path.
Oh, migration.
But yeah, I'm not sad about it. I used to work on field collection module, and I'm not sad to see it go away. Talk about a performance nightmare without any of the benefits, you know. Yeah. I also forgot to mention one of the things. I think does anyone use field group module?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's pretty. I think even with paragraphs that could be useful. I don't know with what they're doing. You know how if you can pull things in and out, like if you nest things. But there might be some work to orthogonal to this to put basically field group in core as just another improvement to the field UI as it stands. So, okay, I'm going to call it there. Thank you, everyone.
Oh.